Rome, Britain, Spain, the Mongols, the Ottomans. Every single empire in history has collapsed. And here's what nobody wants you to notice: they all destroyed themselves the exact same way. The enemies at the gates were never the real threat. The real killer was always inside. Overextension, debt, inflation, division. The same four horsemen ride through every fallen civilization. And right now, as you watch this, the pattern is repeating. The question isn't whether another superpower will fall. The question is, which one is next? Same pattern, different empire. Today we're going to dissect the autopsy report of every great power that ever existed. Because the cause of death is always the same. And once you see it, you'll never unsee it. The debt trap. Every empire starts with a simple lie: we can afford this. Rome began borrowing to fund its legions. Britain borrowed to maintain its colonies. America borrowed to police the world. The pattern is always identical. First, the borrowing seems manageable. Then it becomes necessary. Then it becomes the only option. When you owe the bank $100, that's your problem. When you owe the bank $100 million, that's the bank's problem. But here's what they never tell you: sovereign debt doesn't work that way. When an empire owes its creditors, it doesn't negotiate. It inflates. It debases. It steals from its own citizens through the hidden tax nobody votes for. The Roman denarius went from pure silver to barely 5% in 2 centuries. The British pound lost 99% of its purchasing power. Debt destroys empires. And the US dollar. Since 1913, it's lost over 96% of its value. This isn't mismanagement. This is the pattern. And it always ends the same way. Military overreach. Here's the second horseman. The empire stretches too far. Rome had legions stationed from Britain to Mesopotamia. Britain had soldiers on every continent. The Mongols conquered so much territory they literally couldn't communicate across their own empire. The bigger the empire, the longer the supply lines. And longer supply lines mean more money, more soldiers, more resentment from the people funding it all. The United States currently maintains over 700 military bases in more than 70 countries. That's not defense. That's empire. And empires have a cost. The Pentagon can't even pass an audit. They've failed every single one since audits became mandatory. Trillions of dollars vanish into the machinery of global dominance. But here's the real pattern. It's never the external enemies that bankrupt the empire. It's the cost of keeping them at bay. Rome didn't fall to the barbarians. Rome fell because it couldn't afford to stop them anymore. If you're starting to see the pattern, hit like and subscribe to keep exposing what they hide. Because what comes next connects all the dots. Currency collapse. Now we reach the point of no return. The currency dies. Every empire that has ever fallen has debased its currency first. This isn't coincidence. It's cause and effect. When Rome couldn't tax its citizens enough to fund its military, it diluted the silver in its coins. When Britain couldn't afford its welfare state and its empire, it printed pounds. When America hit the ceiling of what it could borrow, the Federal Reserve started quantitative easing, a fancy term for creating money from nothing. In the absence of the gold standard, there is no way to protect savings from confiscation through inflation. That's the former Fed chairman admitting the game. And the game is always the same. They print money to pay for what they cannot afford. The citizens watch their savings evaporate. The cost of living skyrockets. And the people who hold real assets, land, gold, businesses, get richer while everyone else gets poorer. Print spin collapse. The Weimar Republic, Zimbabwe, Venezuela. The playbook never changes. Only the names do. The bread and circus. As the empire crumbles, the rulers offer a trade. We'll keep you entertained if you stop asking questions. The Romans perfected this. Free grain, gladiator games, chariot races. The citizens of Rome became so dependent on government handouts that they forgot how to feed themselves. A population that demands entertainment is a population that accepts control. Today, the Colosseum has been replaced by screens, endless content, infinite scrolling, 24-hour news cycles that tell you everything except what matters. The welfare state expands. The dependency grows, and the citizens who once built the empire now wait for their monthly checks. This isn't compassion, it's control. The Roman poet Juvenal identified this 2,000 years ago. Give them bread and circuses and they will never revolt. The people who cast the votes decide nothing. The people who count the votes decide everything. The distraction machine keeps running until the bread runs out. And when it does, the circus burns with everything else. Elite corruption. Every dying empire has a ruling class that stops serving the nation and starts serving itself. In Rome, senators bought their positions and sold favors. In Britain, the aristocracy extracted wealth while the colonies starved. Today, the revolving door between government and corporations spins so fast you can barely see the faces. Power corrupts absolutely. Politicians write laws that benefit their donors. Regulators get hired by the companies they were supposed to regulate. Central bankers leave the Fed and walk straight into hedge funds. The system works perfectly for those who designed it. This isn't a bug, it's a feature. The Praetorian Guard in Rome started auctioning the emperorship to the highest bidder, literally selling the empire to whoever paid the most. Sound familiar? Campaign finance, lobbying, legal bribery with better marketing. The names change. The extraction doesn't. When the elite stop believing in the nation they are supposed to serve, the nation stops believing in itself. And that's when the fractures begin. Social fracture. The sixth horseman rides in on waves of internal conflict. Every empire that falls becomes a house divided. Rome had civil wars that killed more Romans than any foreign enemy ever did. Britain had class warfare and colonial uprisings. The Soviet Union fragmented along ethnic lines it had suppressed for decades. A kingdom divided against itself cannot stand. The pattern is unmistakable. As the economy deteriorates, groups start fighting over shrinking resources. The center cannot hold because there's nothing left to hold it together. Identity politics replaces national identity. Tribes replace citizens. Left versus right. Rural against urban. Rich against poor. Old against young. Every possible fracture line gets exploited. And here's what the elites understand: divided populations are controllable populations. While you fight each other, nobody watches them. The Roman plebeians and patricians were so busy hating each other, they didn't notice the barbarians at the gates. History rhymes, and the rhythm is getting louder. Border breakdown. As the empire weakens, it loses control of who comes in and who goes out. Rome's borders became suggestions rather than barriers. The legions that once guarded the frontiers were recalled to fight civil wars. Entire barbarian tribes walked in and never left. This isn't about hating newcomers. It's about mathematics. Empires run on systems, taxation, infrastructure, integration. When migration exceeds the system's capacity to absorb it, the system breaks. Uncontrolled immigration is a symptom of an empire that cannot enforce its own rules. The British couldn't control immigration from their own colonies because they'd stripped those colonies of opportunity. The chickens came home to roost. A nation without borders is not a nation. Today, borders are called controversial, while walls around mansions are called common sense. Rules for thee, not me. The pattern shows that by the time an empire starts debating whether borders matter, the debate is already academic. The enforcement mechanism is already gone. Institutional rot. Every dying empire watches its institutions hollow out from within. The Roman Senate that once governed an expanding republic became a ceremonial rubber stamp. The British Parliament that created modern democracy became captured by special interests. Institutions built to serve the people start serving themselves. The pattern is always identical. The institution's original mission gets replaced by the mission of institutional survival. Agencies that were supposed to regulate become captured by those they regulate. Courts that were supposed to judge become political tools. Universities that were supposed to educate become credential factories. Serve yourself first. The Soviet Union didn't fall because of foreign pressure. It fell because nobody believed in the system anymore. not even the people running it. When institutions stop serving their purpose, they start preserving their power. And once an empire's citizens stop trusting its institutions, the only thing holding everything together is inertia. And inertia eventually runs out. Denial stage. Here's the cruelest part of the pattern. The empire is always the last to know it's dying. Roman citizens were still talking about eternal Rome while the Visigoths were at the gates. British newspapers were still celebrating imperial glory while the colonies burned. The propaganda outlives the power it was designed to project. The denial runs deep because admitting decline means admitting failure. So the narrative gets louder even as the reality gets grimmer. Inflation is called transitory. Debt is called investment. Decline is called transition. The language gets softer as the reality gets harder. In a time of universal deceit, telling the truth is a revolutionary act. The historians always see it clearly afterward. The economists always explain it after the crash. They knew and lied, but in the moment, denial is more comfortable than preparation. And empires always choose comfort over truth until truth kicks down the door. The final act. And then, suddenly, it ends. Not with a bang, but with a slow erosion that one day crosses an invisible threshold. Rome didn't fall on a specific date. It simply stopped being Rome. The British Empire didn't collapse in a day. It contracted until there was nothing left to contract. Collapse. The patterns converge. The debt becomes unpayable. The military becomes unaffordable. The currency becomes worthless. The divisions become irreconcilable. And one morning, the citizens wake up in a different world. Every empire believes it will be the exception to history. None of them are. Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it. The Ottomans thought they'd last forever. The Mongols thought no one could stop them. The Spanish thought their gold would never run out. Every empire falls. The question has never been whether, only when. And the pattern suggests that when is usually sooner than anyone comfortable enough to ignore the signs wants to admit. So here's the uncomfortable truth. Empires don't fall to their enemies. They fall to themselves. The pattern has repeated across millennia. Overextension, debt, inflation, division, corruption, denial, the same script, different actors. And if you've been paying attention, you've noticed something. The pattern is playing out right now. Maybe you see it in your own country. Maybe you see it across the West. Maybe you see it everywhere. The question isn't whether history will repeat. The question is, what will you do knowing what you now know? Question everything, trust nothing. If you made it this far, comment pattern recognized to prove you're among the few who actually pay attention. Every government lies. The question is, what are they lying about? The truth is out there. You just have to follow the money. Subscribe if you want to keep digging.